Bedhead was an indie rock band based in Wichita Falls, Texas that formed in the year 1991. Their sound could be described as soft, subdued, and introspective, being the antithesis to the more abrasive rock sound the 90s was known for, with bands such as Nirvana being one of the best examples. While Alice in Chains, Pearl Jam, Weezer, and the Smashing Pumpkins were starting to achieve great success in their respective genre, Bedhead was a band gracefully existing under the radar. A mature, underappreciated band with a sound that could make any music fan stop in their tracks and listen to every note. Across their 3 studio albums, WhatFunLifeWas in 1994, Beheaded in 1996, and Transaction De Novo in 1998, Bedhead proved that their craft was their main goal, and mass success just wasn't what they strived for ultimately. Today we're going to discuss the music of Bedhead, an underrated gem of a band of originality and passion that delivered on every front as an act to pay attention to. Bedhead was the creative child of brothers Matt and Bubba Kadane, along with members Tench, Coxe, Kris and Trini Martinez. Long before their debut record, the Kadane brothers were hard at work developing this idea of Bedhead, practicing and trying to recruit the perfect members for the sound that they were going for. Bedhead wasn't an accident, it was a deliberate attempt at creating a sound distinct and minimally gorgeous. Going into the recording of What Fun Life Was in 1993, the Kadane brothers went to great lengths to achieve the specific sound. Whether it was re-recording vocals over and over again on their backs, to editing them all together on a dated computer from 1989 that caused them great distress, this was a project with extensive attention to detail. Even the cover art, as minimal and plain as it is, was a deliberate attempt to be unconventional and solidify their individuality. Capturing the spaciousness on record the brothers desired took a lot of trial and error. Bedhead's music was absolutely gorgeous, and I really looked forward to the challenge of capturing it honestly. Paul Quigg. What Fun Life Was had a budget of $3,000 and was recorded on a Sony C48 microphone with various other available mics and a 1-inch 16-track. Mixing was a major adversity. It was nearly impossible. We more or less used 15 tracks to capture some version of the live sound of the room, and the 16th for vocals. But having a slightly different version of the same song on 15 rather than 3 tracks was overwhelming at the mixing stage. Onto the record itself, it, along with the 2 that followed, are easily some of the best of the whole decade. What Fun Life Was released on April 4th, 1994 on the label Trance Syndicate, and it opens with a Liferaft, a song of slow building and metaphorical lyrics referencing a storm and being lost in said storm. This is patient, slowly brewing into a natural disaster before coming down to earth with the realization that life goes on, and as long as you come out alive, you're left with nothing to do except move on. Haywire, aptly named, follows a similar path lyrically, picking up the pieces that were lost in the storm. Musically, it's a little more intense and unforgiving, which leads us to the masterpiece of Bedside Table, a textbook example of an entrancing atmosphere, slowly building and building to a wall of distortion, with eerily beautiful lyrics making mention of hitting one's head on a bedside table, which is actually a true story from when the brothers were on a family vacation as kids. This is the epitome of Bedhead's music, patient, subtle, powerful, and gorgeously arranged music-wise. Other incredible tracks from What Fun Life Was include the next 2 songs, The Unpredictable Landlord and Crushing, the former of which is a bit more playful and almost cynical, the latter being an emotional powerhouse of simplicity, deeply layered with existentialism. The closer, Wind Down, is a sigh of relief, an end to a vivid dream, in which we are able to collect ourselves and wind down, as the title implies. It's an ending with no resolution that is not left off on the highest of notes, but musically it's the perfect conclusion. Not to ignore the rest of this amazing record, especially the potent Powder or Unfinished, but I could talk about it all day and I don't want to drone on and on about its genius for too long. This was a landmark album for indie rock and rock music in general, a breath of fresh air into an oversaturated genre of 3-chord pop songs and a lack of replayability. While big in the Dallas, Texas club scene, their overall impact was rather small. Having released a 2-song single containing an early Bedside Table and Living Well in 1992, The Rest of the Day / I'm Not Here single in 1993, and a full-length record in 1994, There was also a 4-song EP released right before What Fun Life Was on March 31st. It contained a breathtaking cover of Joy Division's Disorder, He's a Hobbit, Dead Language, and What I'm Here For, all recorded entirely live. Going into 1995, Matt, Bubba, and the rest of the band had only scratched the surface of their creative goldmine as artists. In late 1994, the recording of Bedhead's second album, Beheaded, began. It was not an easy process. The band had blown over half the budget on recording songs that wouldn't even make it onto the final album at Cedar Creek Studio in Austin, Texas. Bubba's direct quote was, "We ran out of money after all of the tracking, but Wiltsy and I would sneak into the studio at night to mix it. I would drive down to Austin from Dallas, and we would stay up all night mixing, sleep the next day, and then continue the process the next night." But this wasn't the end of the band's issues. According to Bubba, master tapes were stolen. One night right before Christmas, I arrived in Austin with the tapes of mixes in my car, and Wiltsy and I went straight to eat at Guerra's in South Congress. After we were done, we walked back out to find my car's window smashed. We both stared in shock into the dark abyss of my now empty back seat, where the bag of tapes used to be. Despite hardships behind the scenes, the album was finished, not without sound engineer Adam Wiltsy being fired for helping the band record off the books after the label thought they had already finished. During this time, the band also released the Dark Ages EP on February 20th, 1996. It featured one of the band's most beautiful songs to date, The Dark Ages, along with Inhume and Any Life. Finally, on June 18th, 1996, Bedhead's sophomore album, Beheaded, was released for public consumption. As their second Trance Syndicate release, it largely followed the same path as What Fun Life Was spiritually and musically, but is somehow even more thoughtful and humbled. Being an 11-track affair, every single song flows into the next with ease. This is the sound of Bedhead perfected. Their music was never so dreary, but so confidently played. As various reviewers have stated, it's almost like the music plays itself on Beheaded. It sounds that precise, thought out, and well executed. From the title track opener to the ending, it's a record with simple elements demonstrated in the most complex of ways emotionally and musically. Instead of being on a life raft in a storm, Beheaded begins on a contemplative note of wondering what comes next. It gives the feeling of a man in internal turmoil trying to find himself in a world of insecurity and uncertainty. Instead of saving himself, he must first find himself, or save somebody else. The rest of the day takes place under the sheets, observing life through a window. It's a dive into existentialism, making mention of life's small details, from potholes to a dead black cat scattered on the street. What's Missing is one of the most emotionally forward tracks here. It chronicles a missing puzzle piece in one's life, preventing happiness, a clear mind. It's down and out, and bereft of solace, but it oddly feels hopeful. Burned Out has questions to ask but no answers. It ponders life with such few words, with the musicianship being so understated and raw. Roman Candle has some of the prettiest guitar moments on the record, with those perfectly incorporated high notes speaking more volumes than the actual lyrics. It exudes an unexplainable feeling of both disillusion and desire for a better tomorrow. Withdrawal feels similar in delivery, with the guitar moment stealing the show. It's not flashy, it's simply fragile and emotive. We get an upbeat tune, Fellow di Se, which is Latin for felon of the self. This track is a nice change of pace. Layers and Pennant sounds very familiar, like it's always existed. Heartbreakingly convincing and droning, but easily one of the best songs here. Then we arrive at the closer. Losing Memories is a final goodbye to somebody that is no longer special. That loss of memory, the loss of senses, becoming hyper-aware of the silence that fills the cracks of everyday existence. This is the end of a long journey. Not only do you feel attached to these songs, you feel like the band just specifically played you this entire record. It's a journey that has ups and downs, but ultimately, you're glad that it happened. You will come out of this record feeling something. What that feeling is differs from person to person. But it impacts you, it grips you, and doesn't let go. It has a power that not much music has. That's what makes it so special. It's entirely in its own league. The band would tour this record in 1996 and 1997, and even make their one and only appearance on national television in Italy. During this time, the band purchased a Ford Econoline they called Dwayne. This was also when touring began to be a challenge for the band. Money was tight. the whole band slept in one motel room. We used to drive around for hours looking for a motel room for a few bucks less than the last place, and would then feel totally vindicated at 4 in the morning if we found a place for $39 a night and didn't have to pay $45 for the place that we had come across hours earlier, when it had still been possible to get a good night's sleep. On top of this, most of the members lived in different cities, but for the time being, they were getting by, playing their biggest shows to date, and weren't looking down on the situation too much. When the tour began to wind down sometime toward the spring of 1997, the process of making their next, final record began in May. Bedhead started working on their next record with Steve Albini after exchanging some emails. The band made a huge impression on Albini. I met them in full flower, in the depths of their mania, pursuing contemplative music with the kind of intensity normally found in psychopaths. No detail is too small to sweat, no crack in the veneer not worth gluing and clamping. The recording process began like Beheaded. The band recorded 2 songs they didn't like that were scrapped, but after that, it was a quick project from start to finish. The album was tracked and mixed in 10 short days in the first part of May 1997. Now let's get right into the music. Released on Trance Syndicate on February 10, 1998, Bedhead's final album, Transaction De Novo, was released, with Lepidoptera being released as a single along with the song Leper later in the year. Immediately, you notice it's a slight departure from previous efforts. It's still Bedhead, but the band definitely took some risks and made a genuine attempt to be a little more bombast and energetic. However, there are still quite a few iconic, reflective Bedhead songs here. The opener, Exhume, is classic Bedhead. Slow, somber, and filled with the depression and pent-up emotion the band fulfilled so well. More Than Ever follows those steps. It feels like it's longing for something that's out of reach. It's hopeful, but still somehow stuck. It seems like it's foreshadowing. I really love this track. Parade is a little faster in tempo with some very interesting guitar work that I feel was new territory for the band. It's different, but in a good way. It explodes in the last minute with some distorted guitars, and it's not in any way a track to sleep on. Half Thought is an interesting cut that, like Parade, does some unique things with its guitar moments. It's almost jangly. Extra Mundane may be the fastest tempo Bedhead song to date. It's a super enjoyable ride. It's upbeat, it's encouraging, the ending's amazing, and goes to show the band was certainly capable of making loud, in-your-face rock music. Then we get to Forgetting, which slows the energy to a halt, bringing us back down to earth, remembering that life has its good moments and bad moments. It seems to be speaking of getting older, forgetting the past, and only looking back on nostalgia. It's really somber. These words cut deep but remain painfully true. Lepidoptera is another track that's very introspective. It's somewhat upbeat, as the final line is, "My guardian angel has finally arrived." It's a nice shift from the bleakness of life and embracing the positive aspects. Psychomatica is another fast-tempo, upbeat track like Extra Mundane. It's a legitimately great rock song that sounds like another band of the era could have made it. It's mass appealing, showing a side of Bedhead we rarely saw, unfortunately. But then we get to the closing song, The Present, which is certainly a final hurrah if I've ever heard one. This is hands down the most emotional song of every Bedhead record. These harmonics are downright haunting. It's 7 minutes that goes by in what feels like 30 seconds. It comes and goes in the blink of an eye. No words are spoken until toward the end, and they speak volumes about where the band was at the time, a fading past, and whatever the future may hold. It's not as much looking down, but looking toward accepting that life goes on. Instead of going in with a bleak outlook, it accepts things for what they are. The Present is a song about life and death and what may come after. It's a commemoration to the band and all the memories. It's so powerful and so gorgeously composed, easily for me being one of the best closing tracks ever written. Truly, the best way a band can possibly go out. This was the end of Bedhead. There were no promotional photographs, interviews, or merch. Only one last, short-lived tour. The band called it quits on August 3rd, 1998. The grueling touring schedule, the cheap motel rooms, and band members wanting to go in different directions in life were just a few reasons for the split. Toward the end, the band was becoming more and more economically feasible, but understandably, it just wasn't worth the hassle. Bedhead's final creative project was in 2000, when the Kadane brothers made contributions to a project called Matcha Loved Bedhead, with childhood friends Mish and Josh McKay. At the end of the day, Bedhead gave us a collection of great, timeless songs that will forever stand the test of time. This was a band so outside of rock's conventions that they rose above the label of rock music. Honestly, they were more than that. Their music remains special and deserves to be heard by millions of ears. In the years following Bedhead's breakup, members went on to form new projects. In 2001, Matt and Bubba Kadane reformed as The New Year, and the band has released 4 albums to date, the latest being Snow, released in 2017. They also formed the band Overseas in 2012, which has only released 1 album thus far. Tench Coxe went on to become a professor at the Prothero Jaeger College of Humanities and Social Sciences. As for Kris and Trini Martinez, after searching the internet high and low, I can't seem to find any information about their whereabouts after Bedhead. However, it's probable that they quit music and now lead pretty normal lives in varying professions. In 2014, the entirety of the band's studio output was remastered and reissued in the 1992 to 1998 box set. Also in 2015, a live album was released entitled Live in Chicago, which dates back to a show in 1998. These releases were very well received. This made Bedhead a little more accessible to a younger audience, effectively keeping their music alive for hopefully generations to come. Regardless, the music will always stay with us, and the words of the Kadane brothers muttered into the microphone will always reign true. To conclude, here's a great quote from Steve Albini that sums Bedhead up perfectly. "I thought they, in their music, were brilliant. We built a common language, equal parts philosophy, rock music, and disdain for the dullness around us." Steve Albini. In the emptiness, do things ever change?